How will Khalil Al Hayya's leadership shape Hamas? He's been appointed head of the group's political bureau. Hayya played a major role in the ceasefire talks on ending Israel's devastating war on Gaza. How significant is his election for both Hamas and the Palestinian territory? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. He was a member of a five-man council that led Hamas for almost 2 years. Now Khalil Al Hayya has been appointed to head the group he joined when it was founded 4 decades ago. He's survived a number of Israeli assassination attempts and has been detained many times. More recently, he led Palestinian delegations in negotiations to end Israel's war on Gaza. Hayya takes control as Hamas comes under increasing pressure to cede power, as more than 2 million Palestinians are still enduring nearly daily Israeli attacks despite a ceasefire, and as the Israeli blockade on food and assistance worsen an already dire humanitarian situation in the Strip. So how will Hamas's new leader navigate the realities on the ground, both militarily and politically? We'll ask those questions and more to our panel of guests in a moment. But first, this report from Michael Apple.
There's a new leader at the helm of Hamas. While Khalil Al Hayya isn't himself in the Strip, he was born in Gaza City in 1960, a fact that seems to resonate with Palestinians.
The timing of Khalil Al Hayya's election is of paramount importance, given that the movement's main base of support is here. The fact that he's a native of Gaza and has assumed leadership of the movement is a matter of utmost significance.
A veteran negotiator who left Gaza to live in exile several years ago, Hayya takes the reins of the movement at a time of unparalleled difficulty, uncertainty, and international pressure. More than 1,100 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since October, when a US-mediated ceasefire plan came into effect. It's turned out to be a ceasefire in name only. With daily Israeli attacks and the army increasing its occupation of Gaza to up to 70% of the land. Like so many others, Mohammed was permanently disabled by Israeli strikes on Gaza. He lost his leg, his home in Beit Hanun, and his livelihood.
We call on Khalil Al Hayya, following his election victory, to help open the crossings, pay attention to our situation, and put an end to the deaths in Gaza. Enough suffering. People cannot find any relief. They are living in tents and enduring unbearable heat.
The implementation of President Donald Trump's ceasefire plan has all but stalled. Promises of aid flooding into the Strip through open border crossings haven't materialized. And Israel continues to block the deployment of a transitional, technocratic Palestinian body to administer Gaza, insisting Hamas must disarm first. That's something the group says it won't do until Israel withdraws. Palestinians say they're desperate for someone who can break the deadlock.
We urge Khalil Al Hayya in his capacity as our representative abroad to exert pressure on international powers and in the negotiations to allow people to return to their homes and to put an end to the bloodshed.
For now, more than 2 million Palestinians are stuck, living in limbo. Michael Apple, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Lots of issues to discuss today with our guests on Inside Story. Joining us from Doha is Ibrahim Fraihat. He's a professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Mohammed Shehada is in Copenhagen. He's a senior fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. He's also from Gaza. And in London is Max Rodenbeck, the project director for Israel and Palestine at the International Crisis Group. Thank you, all three of you, for spending time with us today on Inside Story. Mohammed, let me start with you and a big picture question. How significant is this vote and the fact that there is now this new leader for Hamas, even though, of course, he's been on the scene for a very long time?
Oh, well, basically, Khalil Al Hayya represents an extension of Ismail Haniyeh, his predecessor and close confidant. He sits somewhere in the middle in Hamas between Sinwar and Khaled Meshaal as the head of the moderate wing in the movement. So he's seen more as a centrist, center-right kind of pragmatist figure. He is part of the so-called axis of resistance, the Iranian axis. He's very close to Iran. And at the same time, he showed flexibility and pragmatism when it came to the ceasefire negotiations and the Trump deal in Gaza. He's known inside Hamas as the father of 4 martyrs because Israel killed 2 of his sons before October 7th and then 2 after, one of whom was killed when Israel bombed the Hamas headquarters in Doha while they were negotiating and articulating an approving answer to a Trump ceasefire proposal. That gives him substantial influence within the movement, this kind of legacy of being the father of 4 martyrs, and also the legacy of being from Gaza himself, from Shehada, a neighborhood that Israel has wiped out completely. And that enables him to pass very tough compromises that other leaders in Hamas from the diaspora wing would have not had as much sort of credence or credibility or leeway to get through.
Ibrahim, Hayya won a runoff vote of Hamas's Shura Council, and I've seen different reports about this. One senior Hamas official quoted as saying it was by an overwhelming majority. Another report said he just won by a single vote. So not entirely clear whether it was a clear-cut victory, but perhaps more importantly, is it at all clear what direction he will now take Hamas in?
Yeah, the voting was very important, actually, and gives us at least two important indications. The overwhelming majority for voting for Khalil Al Hayya actually came from Gaza, so which signals that a strong internal legitimacy of Khalil Al Hayya within the armed part of Hamas in Gaza, voting overwhelmingly for him. But overall, with the votes from outside, there is a very narrow one. With 34 versus 35. So it's 1 vote extra for Khalil Al Hayya, which gives an idea about kind of a division within the party over the future of Hamas, not over the party itself. The party seems to be united, that was able, despite the very difficult circumstances, able to deliver an election democratically elected within the organization. But also this narrow victory shows that there is no overwhelming majority over the future direction of Hamas. I think, yes, Khalil Al Hayya has a legitimacy also because of his history, lost 4 of his children. And also, he himself was arrested by the Israeli government several times when he was living in Gaza. But again, I think the struggle within Hamas, whether to move on to the next phase of the party after the war, and this is on the external level, the international level. Khaled Meshaal seems more or better positioned to lead the organization over Khalil Al Hayya, who's more aligned with or presents continuity of the organization. So I don't, meaning that we're not expecting to see political or ideological transformation under Khalil Al Hayya, because he represents the past and the present of Hamas. So he's expected to continue that line of political leadership, where Khaled Meshaal, we would have expected to see more of an external trying to negotiate or to formulate the strategic vision of Hamas in the post-war, stronger external positioning of the organization. He's also more accepted within the other Palestinian factions, especially the Palestinian authorities. So would signal more of a national Palestinian unity for Khaled Meshaal. So there are some differences in terms of the future. So under Khalil Al Hayya, I think we should expect to see more continuity of the past.
Well, we'll discuss in a moment a little bit more about what Hayya and Hamas might do. But Max, perhaps you can help us first remind us of the very grim backdrop to all of this. Since October the 7th, 2023, more than 73,000 people killed. There was supposed to be a peace deal and a ceasefire. Is it pretty fair to say what ceasefire?
Yes, I mean there's a ceasefire in the sense that there's not massive offensive action. We're not at war, but I mean this is a ceasefire in which since the the last Israeli offensive, which looked set to take over Gaza City, at the end of a war that had already cost over 70,000 Palestinian lives. Since last October, when the ceasefire came into place, more than 1,000 people have been killed in Gaza. And the numbers go up and down. Lately, they've gone up again. From the Israeli perspective, this is seen as pressure, keeping pressure on Gaza. But at the same time, not only have there been casualties from Israeli airstrikes, which have not stopped, but the humanitarian situation has not improved very much. There's more food, but not much of anything more else. And at the same time, the Israeli forces, which at the time of the ceasefire controlled about 53% of Gaza's territory, and a normal thing in a ceasefire is that the line stops where the ceasefire stops. But the Israelis have been moving forward since then. And just a few months ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu actually declared, "I've given my orders," he said, "to increase our hold from 60% to 70% of Gaza." And this is actually what's happened on the ground. The Israeli forces have moved forward. So you have the sort of surviving 2 million plus Palestinians in Gaza who've been squeezed into a smaller and smaller space. It's very, very hard. And at the same time, the peace process that was supposed to have gone ahead, according to the Trump plan from last year, the 20-point plan, which is supposed to be sponsored by this newly created organization called the Board of Peace. It's really stalled. It stalled after the first phase, in which there was an exchange of Israeli hostages for the ceasefire, and an opening of the border from zero food to some food. But the movement to the next phases of the ceasefire has really stalled. And it stalled largely over the issue of Hamas disarming, laying down its arms. And the Board of Peace seems to be hung up on this particular issue. And, it's really representing the Israeli demand, which is that Hamas lay down its arms before there's any movement towards reconstruction or anything else. So this has held up the movement. And that's where the background to this change of or renewal in some ways of leadership in Hamas has taken place.
Thank you, Max. That's a very useful background. I think it's probably useful, though, before we continue the conversation, to take us even further back to explain the background of Hamas that has run Gaza since winning elections in 2006. Hamas was co-founded by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin in December 1987 in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. The group gained prominence at around the start of the first intifada or uprising against Israel in the late 1980s. Hamas aims to end all Israeli occupation, not just of Gaza, but also of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israel has assassinated several of its leaders over the years, most recently Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July 2024. When you tell the whole story, Mohammed, it really is a tale, and a pretty desperate tale, given the plight of people in Gaza right now. What do we think Hayya's position is on the proposed international plan? Do you think he is currently deciding when to disarm, or is he deciding whether Hamas should ever disarm?
Well, for Hamas, when they agreed to the Trump plan, they were negotiating in good faith. They were told repeatedly, if only you were to release the Israeli hostages in Gaza, the war would be over. If only you would do ABC, Israel would allow more food, the bombing would stop, you would save your own people. And after they abided by all of this, Israel never fulfilled the single item of phase one under the Trump deal. So it is Israel that is making it impossible inside Hamas, even for the moderates or the pragmatists, to win the argument against hardline peers of saying, let us try to be open to disarmament or decommissioning, because the hardliners would immediately say, we gave the United States, we gave Israel everything that they asked for in phase one, and we didn't get anything in return. So why should we trust that once we give up the weapons, which is Hamas's only card of leverage at the moment, that Israel would fulfill its side of the bargain when Gaza becomes weaponless, defenseless, and with no leverage whatsoever? So it is this kind of predicament. You see with the Hamas leadership, some of them throw these sort of trial balloons every once in a while in which they make statements that they are open to the idea of decommissioning. Hayya said that Hamas is open to laying down its arms if it leads to a Palestinian state, if it goes hand in hand, and the dismantling of the militias or the militant groups would come as an outcome of peace, not a prerequisite. And it draws very much on the Northern Ireland decommissioning and the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998. The disarmament came as an outcome of the peace agreement being fully implemented, and it was not concluded until almost a decade later in 2007. So we see voices like Khaled Meshaal, for example, that have been saying Hamas is open to decommissioning, to freezing its weapons, to storing it away, locking it up in warehouses, etc. The problem is whenever you have anyone in Hamas that tries to make such a gesture towards compromise, it is immediately met by Israel trying to crush it. There's this consistent Israeli history of trying to foil what Israel terms or calls a Palestinian peace offensive. When Palestinians try to be moderate, when Palestinians try to gain international respectability, it constitutes a threat to Israel's standing and its position in any negotiations, that Israel tries to suppress it in the most violent way possible to give prominence, to tip the power balance towards the hardliners. So we saw it, for example, in March and in April, when Hamas was negotiating in Cairo the decommissioning with Nikolai Miladinov, the High Representative of the Board of Peace. Israel immediately started to assassinate the top militant leadership of Hamas that would have implemented that decommissioning agreement if that agreement was ever reached. So it is this kind of predicament that makes it difficult to for these discussions, even inside Hamas, to come to fruition.
Ibrahim, what backs up, I think, Mohammed's point there is the fact that Hamas recently ticked off one of the things on the list that it's supposed to do. It dissolved its political administration in Gaza after 2 decades of governing Gaza. And it's Israel that's not letting the technocratic committee that's supposed to take over come in. They're still in Cairo. But in reality, on the ground now in Gaza, the Hamas flag may have come down, but who's in control?
Yeah, this is a very important actually dilemma that Hamas experienced in the past couple of decades when Hamas tried to combine, to bring together resistance and governance together, which is very difficult for a resistance movement to be able to deliver on resistance and governance. So this dilemma that experienced for the past years has finally come to an end, where Hamas withdrew from governance and opened the door for the technocratic government from Cairo to come into Gaza and take care of governance in Gaza, and to be it's their responsibility. Also, this responds to the criticism during the war that from the US and Israel in particular, where they demanded Hamas to be removed from power. With this kind of movement, Hamas not only promised to be removed from governance, but also translated to action and resigned its government from Gaza. So this should pave the way, in theory, for a better reconstruction process. And on an even more urgent than governance is more on the relief side to the Gazans people living still in tents with very harsh economic circumstances. But on the same time, we see that even the technocratic government that's formed by Trump and the Board of Peace Council that was formed during this time by Trump administration, this government is not even allowed to come into Gaza. And this government is supposed to handle the governance, the relief, the reconstruction, all of that. So there is a huge problem over here that on the credibility of the process as a whole, in my view, to what extent the U.S. administration is sincere about this, because this process has not delivered so far anything for Gaza except just plans without any delivery on the ground. So there is a relief dimension that's urgently needed to be handled, and in the background, it seems with the different indicators available that Israel seriously has not dropped its political agenda of displacement of the Palestinians from Gaza outside, because Israel is not allowing any reconstruction to happen. And at the same time, with tightening the relief dimension over here, not delivery on any level, it's pushing the Gazans outside. We're hearing more statements from extremist ministers in the government of building settlements in Gaza. So the political agenda, the elephant of the room, the extremist government vision in Israel is still out there, and it's still haunting the entire process, and is still driving the Israeli response over that, because there is nothing. There should always be a separation between the relief dimension and the political. And what we're seeing on the contrary is that the relief dimension is being manipulated, exploited, and used to serve the Israeli agenda of not allowing the relief work is to be delivered to Gaza on that level, pushing more for the political agenda, with, of course, a U.S. administration busy with the Iran war and is not even delivering in terms of the Board of Peace work the way it promised.
OK, let me bring in Max on that. So the Trump administration and its Board of Peace really are the ultimate guarantor of this. And yet, as Ibrahim says, they're preoccupied with the situation in Iran. They probably have Ukraine higher up the list than they have Gaza right now, leaving right now the people of Gaza in this ever-decaying limbo. That's the way Israel wants it, does it not? Particularly with an Israeli election. There are no votes in helping Palestinians right now.
That's absolutely right, James. Yeah, I think the Israeli election in October sort of puts a hold on things, because there are very few Israeli politicians who would like to, be seen as being soft on Gaza. So it makes it very difficult to move anything forward on those grounds. But even without an Israeli election, it's difficult to see much movement, given the sort of shape of this peacemaking sort of machinery that was put in place basically by the Trump administration. The Board of Peace itself is a very strange animal, with sort of, a four-level bureaucracy that starts with Trump at the top, who, according to the statutes of the Board of Peace, is the life president of the Board of Peace. So even after he's president, he will remain president of the Board of Peace. And these sort of tiers of the organization are kind of just disjointed from each other. There's representation from the region. There's there's no Palestinian representation except at the very bottom level, which is this technocratic committee, which is supposed to govern Gaza, but hasn't even been able to set foot there. And then in the sort of operative level of the kind of negotiations going on, it's the sort of the level one up from the bottom of the Board of Peace. And at that level, things seem to be very stalled over this disarmament question. And, the sort of guiding, lights of the Board of Peace, the sort of steering committee, seem to be actually a few people in the Trump administration, quite close to Jared Kushner, who, share most of Israel's views of Gaza, frankly. And so they're not troubled by the fact that there's an ongoing humanitarian disaster.
And Mohammed, if I can bring you in, the other bit that Max hasn't mentioned is supposed to be an international force, but not many countries have really given a proper contribution to that, and hardly anyone has turned up, and none of them are in Gaza. They're all in southern Israel. Isn't one of the central problems in the way that this has been constructed? It's a bit like what's going on in Lebanon. It's the order of what happens. It's a sort of chicken and egg situation. Does Hamas disarm and Israel withdraws, or is it the other way around? Israel withdraws and then Hamas disarms? And I suppose there's a question of whether either side really is prepared to do what they're supposed to do.
It's precisely right. So the dilemma that you have here, whether Hamas should disarm first or Israel should withdraw first, is very easy to solve. Israel, if it leaves Gaza today and Hamas reneges on its promise to disarm, Israel can come back into Gaza within 5 minutes. We saw this already in the first Trump ceasefire in January, when Israel withdrew from major parts of Gaza. And as soon as Netanyahu decided to collapse that ceasefire, Israel took all of those areas once more, with so little resistance or so little sort of casualties from the Israeli side, of course, with vast destruction on the Palestinian side. So it is politically possible to see a scenario in which Israel leaves Gaza, allows for decommissioning to unfold, and if decommissioning does not unfold, Israel would return again. The problem here is not this. The problem is that Israel is, and Netanyahu in particular, is very heavily invested in sabotaging the Trump deal, although the Trump deal has been by far favoring Israel and taking its side every step of the way. But even when the deal was being negotiated, there was a headline in the Israeli newspaper Ma'arif by an Israeli general that said, if Hamas agrees to the Trump deal, this would be, quote, a security disaster for Israel. They wanted to finish the job in Gaza. The job is ethnic cleansing, the total destruction of the entire enclave. And it remains the Israeli vision until this very moment. So even when you look at the blueprint of...
sorry to interrupt you, but one last question to you, because you're there in Copenhagen, but you have family and friends in Gaza. You're from Gaza. Very briefly, do you see any hope right now?
At the moment, the most difficult thing for my family and loved ones in Gaza is the idea that this is not temporary. This is the new permanent. And it's compounded by the fact that there's the sense that the world has moved on, that the international community has turned its back on Gaza, that Gaza is being deliberately disappeared and turned into a non-topic. And for my family and loved ones that are literally on the street, that are living in tents, that are infested and attacked every day by scorpions, mice, rats, snakes, flies, mosquitoes, etc., with a daily agony in every aspect of their lives, including just trying to find water to drink. The idea that this is going to be the permanent status quo is the most torturing at the moment.
That is a very grim picture you paint for us there. Mohammed Shehada, Ibrahim, Fraihat and Max Rodenbeck. Much of the world may have turned its attention from Gaza, but Al Jazeera's teams on the ground continue to cover developments, and you can find analysis and context on our website, aljazeera.com. We always like to hear your thoughts. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or you can tag us on X. We are at AJ Inside Story. Until next time, that's it from me, James Bays, and the team. But don't go anywhere. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment.